Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. The first Berserker Khazan is a new Souls-like action RPG released on PC and consoles. A couple of months ago there was a demo for this game and I had plans to try it out, but I didn't have the time. At the first sight, this game didn't look like anything special to me, although I thought the artistic style is pretty cool and unique in a way. Well, after playing and completing the game, I can say without a doubt that Khazan is one of the best games I played in recent memory, not just when it comes to Souls-likes.
Thank you.
It completely exceeded my expectations, but it's not without its problems. In fact, I wouldn't recommend this game to people who are new to Souls-likes because it's freaking hard as nails. I can't remember the last time I was stuck on some boss fight for so long, to be honest with you. I had plans to release this video when the game dropped on the 27th, but I just didn't manage to complete the game in time. I've been playing it every day since then for at least 5 to 6 hours a day, and I had so much fun, despite those moments where I wanted to break my controller. We have a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any time with the intro.
Good to know you made it all the way here, General Khazan. Just seeing you gives us hope.
You play the game as a great General Khazan, who is falsely accused of being a traitor and he's mercilessly tortured. He barely escaped death in the beginning, and a ghostly entity called Blade Phantom was one of the reasons why he managed to survive. Khazan gets possessed by this ghost, who shortly after this becomes an ally of Khazan, but not before he kicks your ass at least a couple of times in the boss fight. I didn't expect much from the story in this game because the majority of Souls-likes are very light on the story in general. Well, Khazan is not like that. It actually has a lot of cutscenes and a solid amount of dialogue. It's by no means a storytelling RPG, we're going to spend hours and hours talking to NPCs, but it certainly has a lot more traditional approach to storytelling than your typical Souls-like.
I've decided to stick around here for a while, helping out fools like you.
Before and after every boss fight you're going to get a cutscene that explains what's going on, as well as meeting more than a couple of semi-interesting NPCs. The main theme of the story becomes chaos that's possessing and corrupting the minds of people.
Can chaos really be this powerful?
There are some little plot twists and spoilers in the story that I won't talk about, of course. I think Khazan is a very badass main character in general, and the voice acting is pretty solid.
We can work together. Cooperate. You help me, I help you.
It definitely caught me by surprise, because I expected Khazan to be just run-of-the-mill Souls-like with bare-bones story elements. But it ended up being a pretty interesting story to follow from the beginning to the very end, and I looked forward for more explanation in the next cutscene.
Everything has been taken from me.
Now let's talk about what truly matters here. Khazan has a very tight action combat system that can be brutal at times. Come to think of it, it's brutal in general, but I'm talking about the difficulty of the game. Khazan only has 2 difficulty modes, which is not typical for a Souls-like. These kinds of games usually have 1 difficulty, as you probably know, but after you complete the first mission, you can choose to continue playing on normal or switch to easy. I played on normal throughout the entire game, so I have no idea how easier the game is on the easy mode. I can tell you one thing though, the normal difficulty in this game would be named hard or even very hard in any other similar game. I mean, they even described the game as hardcore on Steam, so that's exactly what you get here. I don't want to scare you here or turn you away from the game. You don't have to have some godly reflexes and muscle memory to beat the game, but you should expect it to have some pretty hard moments. Khazan doesn't start with some crazy hard boss fights, it actually has a pretty easy beginning. I was more worried about the playstyles or the lack of them, because judging by the demo, I thought you could only play with 1 weapon type. You start the game by dual wielding, but only after a couple of hours of gameplay you will unlock 2 more weapon types, the greatsword and the spear. This might seem pretty weak in terms of the weapon variety, but Khazan has an overwhelming amount of different moves and ways to play these 3 weapon types. As I started leveling up more and progressing through the game, I felt overwhelmed with how many different options I have for my weapon. And it takes a lot for me to be overwhelmed with features in games, especially in Souls-likes. This is a good thing if you ask me, but it can easily be annoying for some people. Like I said in the beginning, Khazan definitely expects you to have some experience with Souls-likes in general. The Greatsword was the weapon of my choice, and I never looked back or tried playing with another weapon type the moment I unlocked this weapon. Speaking of which, Khazan has very nice quests where you get to unlock these weapon types. It's like you're fighting a mini-boss with the same weapon, and the presentation for this quest was pretty cool. It makes these moments quite memorable, which wouldn't be the case if the game just gives you the weapon types in a more generic way. These 3 weapon types offer a very different playstyle by default. You start off with a very fast dual wielding playstyle, then unlock the heavy strong greatsword, and the spear playstyle is somewhere in the middle with some very cool moves. First of all, the controls in Khazan are very snappy and responsive. As they should be, because this kind of gameplay requires a lot of precision and muscle memory, and the first thing you need for making such gameplay enjoyable are good controls. I have zero complaints about this. I used an Xbox controller for the whole playthrough and it works great. This game has a stamina system, as you would expect in a Souls-like. It kinda sucks that stamina is being used even outside of combat while you run around the map. I think they should just turn off the stamina usage outside of combat, because it would make the game even smoother. As for the combat itself, stamina works as you would expect, but it also has some cool features that you can unlock later on. For example, one of my unique moves with a greatsword can regenerate my stamina completely if the timing of the ability is on point. Same goes for some other situational abilities, it's pretty cool. These kinds of mechanics in the game makes me think the developers of this game are thinking a little bit out of the box. That's exactly what the Souls-like genre needs, because they started feeling a bit stale if you ask me. I mean, it's not like we don't have some amazing new Souls-likes. We had Lies of P, Wukong, and I also really enjoyed Lords of the Fallen. But they all follow a very similar design concept, at least for the major mechanics and features. Now, Khazan doesn't do anything revolutionary in general, but these little mechanics in combat really makes it feel different. Instead of including a shit ton of unique and flashy abilities, Khazan focuses a lot more on expanding the default attack patterns. When you unlock a new attack, it's usually related to some previous attack that you already knew, and you get to combine them. After about 15 hours of gameplay, you'll have a shit ton of different attacks that you can combine together. It's all up to you to figure it out how it works and what's best to use against different bosses, elite NPCs and just regular combat. Then again, you can keep the combat as simple as possible by just using a couple of your favorite moves. However, I really think you would shoot yourself in the foot if you do that. Not in terms of your effectiveness in combat, but in terms of fun. I found it really fun to use more moves in combat and try to figure out what works the best. But nothing is stopping you from simplifying the game with just a couple of your favorite moves. In fact, you probably die a lot less in these fights if you keep it simple. As for defensive mechanics, Khazan expects you to dodge or block a lot, but it's actually a bit deeper than that. There is a regular dodge, which will avoid all damage, and there is a thing called brink dodge. There is also a brink guard, which is basically a timed block mechanic. The timing for brink dodge and brink guard has to be on point, you have to do it right before getting hit. These abilities have a cool visual effect that you can't miss, and they are very satisfying to pull off. Enemy NPCs have a stamina bar of their own, and when you deal enough damage to them, you get to execute a very strong attack. There are some exceptions to this rule, like NPCs with a red stamina bar, which are just annoying and my least favorite enemies to fight in general. There is a lot of ways to deplete the stamina bar of the enemy, like using the parry ability, which takes out almost half of stamina in one hit, depending on the enemy. But the parry mechanic in this game is way harder than your typical Souls-like. It's very high risk, high reward mechanic. The reason why it's much harder than your typical Souls-like is because all bosses and enemies have a ton of different animations for attacks and they can be unpredictable. But even if you know the complete moveset of enemies, which you will if you get stuck on a boss, it can still be very hard to pull it off, and it's a huge gamble. Enemy NPCs have their own unique attacks that you have to worry about. 90% of their attacks are either dodgeable or blockable, but some of them you'll have to completely avoid or use a special parry mechanic. Yeah, there is more than one parry mechanic in the game, and this one is very situational. It can take you off guard because bosses will seamlessly combine this mechanic with normal attack patterns. It's very satisfying to pull it off and it's very rewarding, and later on in the game it becomes necessary pretty much. I mean, you can still dodge, but it's much harder, so the game definitely encourages you to use this parry mechanic. Khazan also has backstabs, but only outside of combat. Although I believe I saw a skill in the skill tree which allows you to expose the enemy's back or something, so I might be wrong. You can improve each and every one of these combat moves with skill points in the skill tree. In the second half of the game you will unlock a special form that Khazan can use in combat. The Phantom form is pretty cool and it has its own unique skill tree, but I mostly used this form when I wanted to save my ass in some tricky situations. This form only makes the gameplay in Khazan even more aggressive, and it's definitely a plus, even though I only used it in a more defensive way. Those will be all the major features and mechanics of the combat, but like I said before, the amount of different attacks you can learn and use in combat is staggering, and I certainly won't name all of them here. I was completely wrong about the gameplay in this game because I thought it's going to be one-dimensional with some linear progression. But every weapon type offers you different skill trees with passive and active abilities. We'll talk about those abilities and the progression system right after we talk about the boss fights. I loved each and every boss fight in this game, even though I hated some of them while I was playing because they kept kicking my ass. The thing is, there is not a single bullshit mechanic that made me feel like the game is not fair, except maybe one thing. I think all boss fights are a bit overtuned, because they have a shit ton of health. Now, I'm sure you can find a way to deal some crazy damage to these bosses by using certain builds and getting best weapons. But if you just play the game in a normal way, or even if you grind levels, it won't matter a lot, because these bosses have huge amounts of health. None of their mechanics are the problem here. It was very interesting to learn their attack patterns and extremely satisfying when I finally get to kill them. Some of these bosses have up to 3 different phases, which will just drive you insane and just force you to lock in completely. This is something that the most dedicated fans of this genre will truly appreciate. Maybe not so much when it comes to casual fans of Souls-likes. Nevertheless, I think the combat and all boss fights in this game are completely fair. Every time I died, I felt like I made a mistake. It was not because of the bad hitboxes, bad animations, or whatever. If you truly want to experiment with all the combat moves you have, you simply need to die at least a couple of times before you learn what works. Khazan is a rare Souls-like where I felt encouraged to try out all the combat moves I have in my arsenal and combine them in different ways. Figuring out which move deals the most damage, or do you have enough time to execute those moves, was really fun against the bosses. The first big turning point for most players will probably be Viper boss fights. Now, I'll try not to spoil endgame boss fights, but we simply need to talk about this because that's the main content of the game. Viper boss fight happens relatively early in the game, and only some of the boss fights I'm showing you here are from the late game, so I won't spoil a lot of these fights. Viper felt pretty damn hard to fight as a greatsword user, but after you start fighting other bosses later in the game, you'll realize that Viper was not so bad after all. This guy really made me feel paranoid because every time I defeated a boss after him, I was expecting to see a second phase. But not all of the bosses have that second phase. What I really like about this game is the build up before these boss fights. Some areas before the boss fight will have normal enemies of a similar type as the boss, with similar, if not identical movesets. So you're already learning how to deal with some boss attacks before you even get to the boss. Come to think of it, I wish that even more levels in the game would do this. Pretty much all boss fights have a unique element that you have to worry about, as well as the level before the fights. You simply can't afford to ignore these damaging elemental effects, otherwise you'll die much faster. It's another thing which the area before the boss fight tries to prepare you for by having a similar effects, like fire, poison, plague and so on. Bosses will usually have a special attack which will build up these damaging effects on your character. I'm going to assume that this is maybe a bit easier on the easy difficulty, but normal difficulty requires you to pay attention to everything. I have to add that boss fights are very cool in terms of presentation as well. It makes some of these boss fights freaking epic, and it makes Khazan feel like a very high budget game. That's not the case with everything in the game, but these moments deserve to be mentioned. Pretty much all boss fights are closely related to the story of Khazan as well, which makes them a bit more interesting in general. I think it's a bit refreshing to see a more straightforward story in a Souls-like game, but let's not start talking about the story again.
A hero. Perhaps once, but not now.
Now we need to talk about the progression system. Khazan has a traditional RPG progression with different skill trees for all weapon types. It also has some general skill trees that will increase various Khazan's abilities. There is a leveling up system that requires Lacrima, which is the experience currency of this game. You can increase your stats when you have enough Lacrima, which is a pretty straightforward system. But since I'm a dumbass and I completely forgot that besides the strength stat, the proficiency stat is also important for greatsword scaling, I didn't invest a single point into it. That's not a huge mistake, and I had a lot of HP and decent stamina, as well as a very high strength stat. I mean, sure, I will probably deal a bit more damage if I focused on this stat as well, but it is what it is. The skill trees will unlock more active and passive abilities once you reach a certain level. However, in order to gain skill points, you need to increase your mastery level with the weapon type of your choice. This is simply done by just using the weapon. It's like an improve on use system that you could see in many RPGs. I love this kind of progression in RPGs, and I love it even more in Khazan. Here is what's so great about this system in this particular game. Even if you get killed by a boss or some other enemy, you will always feel like you're making progress with your character and getting stronger. No matter how many times you die in a boss fight, you're increasing the mastery level and eventually you get a new skill point to invest. It's a great little system which encourages you to push forward no matter how hard the game gets. Now of course, the game has methods of preventing you from abusing the system by putting a limit on the mastery level. Once you hit this limit, you need to complete the main mission, which is usually the current boss fight, before the mastery level unlocks again. Still though, I felt like this game is more than generous when it comes to earning new skill points. Another thing related to this, in a way, is the fact that you can get your Lacrima back upon death outside of the boss arena. You don't need to start the fight again to get your Lacrima back, which means that you can easily get more Lacrima to level up even if the boss keeps killing you. And you get more Lacrima by just fighting the boss, so once again you always feel like you're progressing and making Khazan stronger. Like I said before, I think these developers are thinking outside of the box. All of this is just small features, but I truly appreciate stuff like this because it makes Khazan stands out in the sea of other Souls-likes. While Khazan is definitely a pretty hard game, it's trying its best not to be a very punishing game. I like hard games, but I don't like punishing games that have negative progression, so this is a huge plus in my book. It's yet another reason why I really enjoyed playing this game and why I took my time with this review.
And that is all that matters.
Then we have the great itemization system, which took me by surprise. I mentioned before that I expected some linear progression system and not a lot of options in general. I don't know why, those were simply my first impressions of the demo by just watching the clips. It turns out that Khazan has a great itemization system which remains interesting throughout the whole game. It's more like a traditional RPG itemization system where you can collect various set items while looting NPCs or crafting them in your hub area. They did a phenomenal job from the very beginning, and you'll get to complete your first armor set soon after you begin the game. Most of the loot is RNG, but some items are not, and you'll even find some full set items in specific places on the map. All armor and weapon sets will give you different gameplay benefits. The more items you equip from the same set, the more benefits you get. What's also great about this system, you can combine different set items and still get some of those unique stats. The visual progression in Khazan is very good. All armor sets and weapons have a unique look, and it doesn't take long to find some very cool looking items for Khazan. Some of these items have a more grounded look, while others have a high fantasy style in the best way possible, I would say. I was very pleased with the visual progression in general. The level design in Khazan is pretty decent. It's far from being amazing, but it's much better than I expected. The way it works will be very familiar to anyone who played the Souls-like game before. You will unlock different shortcuts for previous areas you explored, and you will have at least a couple of different paths to take. Those optional paths will usually lead you to something valuable to loot, like the schematics for armor sets that you can craft or some consumable items. Even though I did enjoy the level design in Khazan for the most part, I think it's very artificial. It's definitely not bad in general, it's just the weakest part of the gameplay in this amazing game. The level design started off pretty weak, to be honest, and those shortcuts in some levels are not that immersive, to say the least. They felt very artificial and gamey. I mean, why the hell I can't just jump here, when Khazan can do some freak of nature acrobatic moves? It makes zero sense. Some shortcuts make a lot more sense than others, but this is something that I expect to drastically improve in the sequel. I mean, it's logical to expect a sequel, because this game was a big success for the studio. It also felt to me like they built these shortcuts first, and then the whole level around them. That's one of the reasons why I think the level design felt really artificial. If you ignore the immersion breaking feel of these levels, or if you simply just don't care, they're not that bad actually. Most of them have a very decent vertical exploration. Another negative thing about the level design is some very generic looking areas. I mean, the game has some cool moments where the visuals are great, but it also has a lot of generic looking areas which can only make you feel confused and run in circles a little bit. It definitely lacks unique assets and visual details in a lot of areas. The levels don't lack the visual variety, that's actually quite decent in the game. You're going to explore different looking levels, but pretty much all of those levels have a lot of same-ish looking areas with very little visual detail. The atmosphere in the game ranges from solid to below average, but this can be a bit subjective, I guess. Still though, it's fun to explore these levels and find everything you can loot, because it's usually very useful stuff. The hub area in the game was okay. There are actually a couple of different versions of the hub area, which was kinda cool. And I like how the game unlocks more areas in the hub zone when you progress through the main story. This will be a good time to talk about the visuals of the game in general. Khazan, other NPCs and character models in general in this game are very well done. It's like a mix of anime and a more realistic visual style, it's very interesting actually. Overall, Khazan is a very pleasant game to look at. The combat has some amazing visual effects, and more importantly, the visual clarity in boss fights is pretty damn good. I never had any issues with the clutter on the screen, I could always tell what's going on even in the most intense moments. As for the performance, this game is extremely well optimized for my PC. I have the infamous 4060 Ti and I could still run the game on 4K with a mix of high and medium settings. And only once or twice I had to reduce those settings to medium because I felt like the frames were dropping a little bit. Other than that, the game felt very smooth in general on my PC. I have some mixed feelings about the sound in Khazan. I think the sound effects in combat are great and it makes the combat very impactful. While the soundtrack is very forgettable, with only a few cool tracks. Even the ambient soundtracks are usually pretty weak and non-existing most of the time. Although this seems like a deliberate design decision, but even so, I think the game could benefit a lot from some great ambient sounds. I already touched upon the voice acting before, and I think it's pretty solid.
I just wanted to thank you for saving me. I owe you my life.
I'm looking for Pavel, the nobleman. Do you know where I can find him?
Oh, I wonder... Are you the great General Khazan?
And that would conclude my review for this amazing Souls-like game.
And that is all that matters.
Khazan became one of my most favorite games in 2025, and I can see myself playing this game a lot more in the future as well. Tell me what you think about the first Berserker Khazan in the comments below, and do you agree or disagree with me?
Thank you.
Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.